Reverend Kelli Clement, my guest today, is the Minister of Social Justice with the First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis. And she's also the Training and Curriculum Consultant for the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, RCRC as it's affectionately known, in Washington, D.C. And now you're the former executive director of the Minnesota affiliate of RCRC.
That's right.
And you graduated from United Theological Seminary of the Twin Cities, and I understand you make your home in South Minneapolis with your husband, your daughter, and a poodle.
That's right.
Good for you, Kelli. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bill. It's lovely to be here.
And we're talking this time about reproductive justice. What's the meaning of that to you?
Thank you, Bill. I'm so glad to be here and have an opportunity to talk about reproductive justice, which is such an important concept to me. For years and years, we talked about pro-choice and pro-life, and these two opposing labels that only seem to go head to head. In 1994, a group of black women came together to form this understanding of reproductive justice. And they articulated 3 human rights that go with reproductive justice: the right to have children, the right not to have children, and the right to raise children in safe and healthy environments. To that, the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice has added a 4th human right, and that's the right to celebrate sexuality in health and wholeness. And that's where we bring in good sexuality education, the ability to make good choices, understanding human beings as sexual beings and not sort of shaming us for that. So those 4 human rights, I'm going to say them again because it's important to hear them: the right to have children, the right not to have children, the right to raise our children in safe and healthy environments, and the right to celebrate sexuality in health and wholeness are the 4 human rights that make up the frame of reproductive justice. And we think by talking about it as a justice issue rather than pro-choice and pro-life and going head to head, we can find some common ground and break out of that unhelpful duality.
That sounds very wise.
Well, it was African American women and women of color who led a movement that was kind of stuck in an old way of thinking into this wisdom. And as a white woman working in this movement, it behooves me to listen to the wisdom of people who are saying this is a different and more important way for people who think about it that way. So that's where we're taking our cues.
And so why should people of faith have a voice in reproductive justice?
Well, there are some folks who think that if you're a person of faith, you can only have one kind of opinion about reproductive health and rights and choice and the choice of whether or not to continue a pregnancy. That all people of faith believe that abortion is wrong.
Not true.
Not true. You and I know that's not true. There is a broad coalition of progressive people of faith, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Unitarian Universalists, a broad group of people who say human dignity is a gift of being human, and for people of faith, a gift of God. The right to have self-determination, the right to make the most important decisions we will ever make. The decision of when and whether to raise a child is one of the most fundamental decisions that we can make. And as people of faith, we think that that's an important thing that we should be involved in.
Yes. I agree with you thoroughly.
Yes.
Now, when are you testifying before legislative committees? Or?
I certainly have. The Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, both in Minnesota and nationally and in other states, often provides pastors who offer testimony, who say, when there are so many bills and legal challenges to access for full spectrum reproductive health care, including abortion care, that when those bills come up before state legislatures, we try to be there to say, as a person of faith, as a matter of religious liberty, we believe that this safe and legal procedure ought to be protected.
Good.
That there are...
You're not citing Scripture as to tell them what to do. You're basing it on principles that they can properly pay attention to, values.
You know, there is that's exactly right. I think you're exactly right about that, Bill. There's an awful lot of proof texting going on.
It doesn't work.
It doesn't work. So proof texting is when you take one passage or one group of passages out of Scripture and say, see, here it says, this is how we should do it. And here's the proof, the text that is the proof. And we try really hard not to do proof texting. We think that the Scriptures are such important documents that they should not be used to beat people over the head with them. And frankly, the Scriptures say nothing about abortion. They don't say anything at all about abortion. They say things about valuing life. Yes. And we think valuing life is incredibly important. Valuing all of life, including the children that a woman already has, that they already have in a family, including valuing one's own life and being able to make self-determination, in the lives of people who are stuck in poverty or are experiencing homelessness or otherwise economically disadvantaged. There's an awful lot in the Scriptures about economic justice and making justice for all people. To pull out one or two Scriptures and beat people over the head with it, we think is not what they're intended for.
You're so right.
That's what I think about that.
Partly because we have a constitutional amendment that the First Amendment applies to the states as well as to the federal government.
It does. And people are certainly entitled to believe what they want to believe. I hope they will. I think that having more robust conversations about what we believe and how we construct our values is very important. I wear this collar to remind myself and to remind others that it's an interfaith coalition of people who believe that women ought to be able to make their own personal healthcare decisions. And we come to that from a variety of scriptural and ethical and moral understandings. So
good.
We can do that without
proof texting.
Without proof texting, right, right, exactly.
So, I think in some ways you've already said why you are doing this work, but I bet there's more. Why do you do this work?
I'm trying to decide how much of the story I want to tell you. I've told this story a number of times before. When I was in seminary, I had a class, and it was a social justice class, and each of us were to pick one topic. We were going to stay with it all semester long, and you were going to write a sermon on it and an educational piece and do the research and so on. And I was going to do something about Darfur, which was in the news right at the time, the crisis in Darfur. And my professor, very wise woman, Reverend Meg Riley, said to me, well, that's an important thing to study about, Kelly. You could really do some good work, but what's going to get you out of bed in the morning, early in the morning, to do this work? What's your hook? And I began casting about, and I thought the only issue that I had cared this much about was women's reproductive health. But you couldn't do that and be a person of faith, could you? I'd never heard that you could do that. And I began to do some research, and when I found the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice and found it was like walking into a room of like-minded people who were guided by faith, guided by a sense of morality and ethics, as I think most people are, but also guided by a relationship with something larger than themselves, whatever they call that, who were making this decision. I felt like I had come home. And what I really wish is that I had been able to talk to someone like this when I was making the decision to terminate a pregnancy. My life is better because I was able to have an abortion. As a clergy person, as a mother, as a wife, as a friend, as a daughter, my life as a human being is better because I was able to access safe and legal abortion care when I needed it. I was not ready to have that child. Yeah. Being a parent is the most important relationship in my life, and I was able to make the decision of when that would happen. That's why I do this work.
Oh, I recall back in the 1960s, women coming for pastoral counseling to me from their university. They knew they could not allow this pregnancy to continue. Mm-hmm. And I quickly came to realize I needed to consult with one of the experts here in my state to find out what can we do.
What can we do?
Yeah. And there's now a group, Narrow Pro-Choice, which I helped form back in 1968.
Thank you for that.
When it was National Association for Repeal of Abortion Law.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And it looks to me like we need to repeal some laws that are going into effect in other states now.
Well, the encroachment now, the movement now is about access.
Yeah.
So I believe that the people who don't believe that women should make their own personal health care decisions, who want to be able to make that for them, say, well, we can't overturn Roe v. Wade, though they're trying that as well, but we will just do all we can to narrow access by doing waiting periods, in some states up to 72 hours. These TRAP laws, targeted regulation of abortion providers, is a TRAP law. The Minnesota legislature is trying to pass a couple of those this session.
You mean some members of the legislature?
Some members of the
legislature. It might be a majority.
Right, right. Some members of the Minnesota legislature are trying to pass TRAP laws, and they purport to have women's health in mind, but they are so...
That's not healthy.
They're so strict that even the Department of Health has argued against their passage because they're unnecessary. And they just target abortion providers.
They can take health away.
Absolutely.
And we need to let the woman judge with her. She is entitled to that choice.
Well, and with her, the idea that women are not thoughtful, that they're not considered opinions that women are going to, that it's a frivolous idea, is just plainly false. We know that that's false. Yeah. We know that of women who access abortion care, upwards of 60% already have children. They know what it is to make difficult parenting decisions. And of those 60%, almost 80% of them live at or below the poverty line. They already have children, and they're making decisions about how to best provide for the children they have.
They're supporting as many children as they can possibly take care of.
That's right. So the fourth human right of reproductive justice, which includes comprehensive sexuality education and access to contraception, is so important for us to be able to have the children we want and not have the children that we don't want to have, so that we can be excellent providers for the children that we do have. That's good morality. It's good public policy. It's good health care.
I agree. But why is it that you think now is the time to talk?
Well, The reason that we say now is the time to talk, and the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, rcrc.org, has a campaign called It's Time to Talk. We have, people of faith have been pretty quiet about this. Some have always talked about it, but for the most part we've been pretty quiet. And by doing so, we have let louder, more strident voices, both for reproductive justice and against, both pro-choice and anti-choice or pro-life, we've let them yell in the middle. It's time for us to say, as a person of faith, I stand for this, and here's why. Here's the value that I bring to it. And if you don't, let's talk. Let's have a conversation. Let's find where we can find common ground. Do you think people should be able to have the children that they want to have? Do you think that people should be able to not have the children that they don't want to have? Do you think that everyone should be able to raise their children in safe and healthy environments? With that one, we think we can really find common ground with people. Who would say no? I don't want people to be able to raise their children in safe and healthy environments. No, people can agree with that value. Now, how do we look at public policy to get there? So we think it's time to talk now because there's so much encroachment. 80% of the counties in the United States do not have an abortion care provider.
Really?
Really. And if you go to rural counties, it's almost 97% of counties do not have an abortion care provider. The access to women being able to make their own personal health care decisions is getting less and less available. So we really do have to talk about it now because our opposition is incredibly well organized and incredibly well funded. They don't get to own the conversation, but the only way that'll happen is if we take it back.
What you say, incredibly well funded? What?
Religious organizations, specifically the Catholic Church, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, many pro-life, so-called pro-life organizations are funded through religious organizations, through churches and so on. They just get an awful lot of funding for this. And they're very well organized. I mean, I got to give it to pro-life ministries and the various anti-choice groups who think that women shouldn't be able to make their own health care decisions.
They're well organized.
They're very well organized and they're well funded. So it's time for us to stand up and talk and say...
And get organized too.
Right, and get organized. So here's the thing. I didn't always stand up and say, well, I had an abortion and my life is better for it. I had to learn to say that. We didn't think we'd have to tell these stories, right? We thought it was private. We thought it was a private story. It's our own business. When we can tell our stories without shame and without fear of recrimination, there is a freedom in that. When we don't tell our stories, our opposition uses our silence as shame. There is a tremendous amount of shame heaped on women for making their own personal health care decisions, for our sexuality. An awful lot of shaming of women about our sexuality.
Well, that's very inappropriate, in my opinion.
Absolutely. So we have to learn how to tell our stories. We have to be able to learn how to talk about it. When it's safe, you have to practice it. I had to cry a lot.
Yeah.
There's a sense that if we say there's grief, then somehow there's something wrong or it was the wrong decision. No, grief and relief can exist at the same time.
And we grieve about many things that go wrong in life.
Yes, exactly.
And certainly I've seen women grieving the loss by spontaneous abortion, as well as ones that saw fit to wait a while before proceeding with a pregnancy.
Yes.
It just wasn't the right time, particularly with young women who are pursuing a higher education.
This is one of the reasons that I'm so excited about the program that we have through the National Office of the Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice, and this is the work that I do as a training and curriculum consultant. We do pastoral care training for clergy members and seminarians and lay leaders in congregations to help them be present with their people around issues of reproductive decisions, obviously a time-sensitive question of when somebody is making the decision of whether or not to continue a pregnancy. That's reproductive decisions. But also reproductive loss. And reproductive loss can be the feelings of grief that may come with abortion, adoption, infertility, miscarriage, stillbirth, infant death, or sexual trauma. Any way that our reproductive lives don't go in the way that we imagined them. And it's a grief that's not often talked about. It's not sanctioned very much. And so we train clergy to listen for signs or stories of this kind of reproductive loss. And when you take those kinds of loss as a whole, that affects an awful lot of us. In my own story, there's abortion and infertility and miscarriage and now parenting. And so, yes, it's so good. But I don't think my story's unusual, and you have to work a ways to get there. And when we can do that as people of faith and bring our moral, ethical commitments as human beings to that story.
Applying your values.
Applying our values.
Yeah.
Right.
And I sure wish you'd been training and curriculum consultant when I was in the ministry with the congregation. That would have been so helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for your work in being present with women and families and supporting them through challenging times and being able to say, I stand for your right to make your own decision.
Yeah.
It's brave of clergy to do that.
And back then, a woman deciding to seek an abortion often ended up with a coat hanger being used.
Yes.
That just horrible, horrible situations that endangered their lives.
We know that when abortion is safe and legal and accessible, that families do better, that women do better, that societies do better. In the countries that have the most liberal abortion laws, excellent health care, access to health care, access to comprehensive sexuality education, and access to contraception, in those countries, the rate of abortion is the lowest in the world.
Yes.
We're going about it the wrong way.
Yeah. Why? Because contraception is
right. We have to
easy,
be able to, right.
And a woman can make the choice before pregnancy rather than have to deal with the problem that could arise.
Right. Right. We're fortunate in Minnesota that we have fantastic, courageous, professional, dignified reproductive health care.
Good.
In Duluth at the Duluth Women's Center, and in the Twin Cities at Planned Parenthood and at Whole Women's Health and at the Robbinsdale Clinic. There's fantastic, we're so fortunate here. And I'm very hopeful that we can keep it that way, and that people of faith can say, no matter how you feel about it for yourself, no matter how you feel about whether or not a person should or shouldn't continue a pregnancy, that we can agree that it should be safe and legal and accessible. That's really important for our society and for our, for our world.
You've given us a lot to think about, Kelli. And I wanted people to know how to follow up on this. One way is to go to the website, www.rcrc.org.
That's right. rcrc.org, Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice. And there you'll find resources for the It's Time to Talk campaign. You can also find resources from different denominations. How do Presbyterians feel about this? How do Methodists feel about this? How do Unitarian Universalists feel about it? How do humanists feel about it? So there are
Buddhists, Jews.
And Buddhists and Jewish community and Muslim and Hindu. There's quite a lot on there. Mm-hmm. And obviously not all faith communities agree, but we do agree on human dignity and being able to have a dignified conversation about it.
And are there some major religions in the world that do simply accept abortion as an appropriate part of life?
Absolutely. All of those. The Religious Coalition for Reproductive Choice is made up of United Methodists and Episcopalians and Jews, Conservative and Reform, Unitarian Universalists, United Church of Christ, Lutherans. I'm not sure if the Lutherans have a statement on there.
Well, there are many brands of Lutherans.
Yes, that's right. But many, many faith communities, and different ones will say in different circumstances it's available. But the notion that all people of faith are against contraception or are against abortion care,
not true.
It's not true at all. It's absolutely not true.
Yeah.
So,
now we've got a little bit less than 3 minutes left.
Okay.
Is there something more that you want to add to sum up?
Let your elected leaders know that if you are a person of faith and you support reproductive justice, let your elected leaders know. They tell us that it's so important to hear from people of faith because they hear so much from the other side. And so they really do appreciate that view. And I know that you're on the Free Thought Forum here, and I understand that a lot of people who are listening to your show may not use the word faith. That you have atheists and humanists and agnostics, and
but our values.
All of us. But our values. I'm a person who attends a congregation. If you do, let your elected leaders know that that you support it. It's really important that we do it through the legislature. Let even to your city council people to know, because
really?
Some cities are blocking access, or your school board. Yes, to let your school board know we really stand for comprehensive sexuality education.
Yes.
It is wrong to know some information and hold it back from our children. You know, so I think letting them, speaking this value in the electoral process is really important.
That is eye-opening to me. Speak to the school board members, speak to the city council, how about the county?
Yes, absolutely. Because our opposition is so well organized, some of the ways that they are organizing is to get on school boards or county boards or be commissioners or city council people, and drawing that line and say, well, it may be legal in the state, but it's not going to be legal in our city, or we're not going to allow a provider in our city. So it's really important.
Short-sighted.
It's very short-sighted, I think.
And, I mean, we're in the midst of a overpopulation in the world, and I've had the head of the World Population Balance here, who's explained to us how important it is to allow women to have that reproductive choice.
Yes.
Kelli, this has been a magnificent half hour with you.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in.